All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Let's talk about the price of groceries at the grocery store, shall we? By the way, we got inflation numbers yesterday, right, for the month of September. It showed groceries, by the way, the price of a grocery basket risen by 5.8%. So that's a slower rate year over year, right? A year ago was 11%, the inflation rate on groceries. So it's slower, but it's still 5.8%. Now, when it comes to prices at the grocery store, the federal government has had a whole lot of bluster in the last month or so. Industry Minister François-Philippe, remember, it was 2-3 weeks ago. He's like, I solved it. Grocers have come to the table. Your prices are going down. And now this week, a different tune from the industry minister. He's lamenting that Canada's grocers aren't being forthcoming with their plans to reduce prices. Let's go now to Stuart Smyth, a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Saskatchewan, and he holds the Agri-Food Innovation and Sustainability Enhancement Chair at the university. Stuart, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Elias.
So, first things first, I don't know if you can just look 1 month inflation numbers and make an assessment here, but the numbers that did come out yesterday on inflation, what did they say to you about what Canadians are paying at the grocery store?
Yeah, so in your intro there, you said it's down significantly, and they are. They've been incrementally dropping every month for really since January, February. We were double digits for the start of the year, and now we're down. It got into 8.7, and now we're just below 6%. But still, there's an awful lot of room to go when we compare the difference between overall inflation and food price inflation. The two numbers are significantly far apart.
So how do you close that gap? What needs to be done to close that gap?
Well, the thing that frustrates me is that, as you said, that the industry minister has been saying a lot, but they haven't been doing a lot. There are a lot of policy options available to the federal government that could have an impact on food prices. They could remove some of the interprovincial trade barriers. They could make migrant labor easier to access because there's crops that, fruits, vegetables that are under harvested due to the lack of labor. They could remove the carbon tax from food transportation, but they seem to want to blame the grocery retail space rather than actually implement any policy changes that could help us as Canadians.
Okay, so Stuart, this to me, you've gone straight to the point here, right? So it's the federal government keeps hammering on our grocery stores. They're to blame, right? Then I look at the financials of grocery stores. It doesn't seem like they're making staggering profits percentage-wise, but they keep going after grocery stores. What you're just saying there, in this entire chain, whether it's taxation and barriers, that is the key here on lowering the price of groceries. Why the disconnect?
Well, I think they get more good press from hammering the retail sector than they will from saying the environmental NGOs could come back and say, well, if you're removing the carbon tax from food transportation, that has an environmental impact. Well, I think Canadians are at the point that reasonable food prices is their number one priority right now, and so they're concerned about adverse press. That's my guess, because and when they've had the grocery retailers in Ottawa, they've never it's been more of a smoke and mirrors, a lot of grandstanding, but they're not pressing them on what percentage of your corporate profits comes from the sale of food items that I can eat. I don't care what the profit margins are on dog food or paper towels or light bulbs. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in what the profit margins are on those items in a grocery store where we can buy them and we can consume them once we get home. But nobody's ever asked that question.
Yeah, and to your point, also that these massive companies now, they're not just grocery stores, right? They own pharmacy labels, right? They own those brands. They sell clothing. They do so much more than just groceries.
Yeah, and they've got cosmetics in there as well, right? So they're your one-stop shopping center for a lot of your household needs, but it's a bit frustrating as an academic that nobody within the government side is pushing to say, okay, well, what percentage of your profits comes from the sale of fresh fruits and vegetables, just as an example? Because, if that profit margin was, say, 5 or 6%, that's maybe reasonable for a lot of Canadians. But if the retailer said, well, our profit margins are 80%, that's a completely different response.
So let me ask you, Stuart, where do we go right now? Canadians are hurting. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Canadians are hurting. So where do we go?
Well, one of the things I was looking at this morning is the value of our dollar compared to the States has dropped 3 cents in the past 2 months. So mid-August, we were about 76 cents. We're down to 73. And a lot of that drop in our value has a significant impact and will over the next 6 to 8 months as we import more fresh produce from the States. And so I think a lot of this is, international commodity markets looking at the Canadian economy, the size of our debt, and the value of our dollar falls. And so the priority for the federal government right now should be to instill confidence in the Canadian economy and work to reduce our deficits and try to bring the value of the Canadian dollar up, because that will help lower the exchange rate on the produce that we're going to be buying over the winter months.
Stuart, I kid you not. When I bring up the value of the Canadian dollar, some people look at me like my arguments from the planet Mars. And, interest rates, right? If the Bank of Canada, we see the tremendous growth happening in the U.S. economy. If the Bank of Canada doesn't increase interest rates, there's a good argument to be made that the Canadian dollar is going to fall another 3 cents and go into the 60 cent, the high 60 territory then. That's going to hurt Canadians when they buy groceries if that happens, right? If the Canadian dollar continues to fall.
It certainly... And we notice it more in the winter months, right? Mm-hmm. Because virtually all of the fresh produce in our grocery stores is either from, anywhere from Florida to California across that southern U.S. Production zone. Certainly we get some from Latin, the Caribbean part of the world, but the vast majority of it is coming from the U.S. So every cent that our dollar drops, it's going to take more money out of your pocket, my pocket, and every other Canadian's pocket to buy that fresh produce.
Stuart, despite all that, there has been those promises that the rollbacks and the price cuts are actually coming any moment now. Is there a hope of that?
Well, I was reminded this week from what Minister Champagne was saying, and I went back because I was reminded it was October 17th last year that Sobeys put out a press release saying they were going to freeze grocery prices on their in-house products, which was several hundred items, for 3 months, from November, December, and January. And then it came out that all the stores in the retail industry tell their suppliers that we want to see price freezes for the 3 months around the holidays, particularly leading up and into Christmas and New Year's. Mm-hmm. And so that to me is a little bit of a ray of good light, is that, we're just a couple of weeks away from where the retailers are really going to be pushing their suppliers to hold back on any cost increases.
Stuart, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for the conversation.
My pleasure. You have a great day, Alex.
You too. That's Stuart Smyth from the University of Saskatchewan and the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics.